Hello, and welcome to my situtory. Not that I really need it at the moment because it is still really sunny and hot in Scotland, which is quite unusual at this time of year. But we're going to keep it up for the summer because at some point the rain and the wind will arrive. Thank you to everybody who got in touch to wish me well with the exhibition. It's been on all this week, it's been really good, and most of this week's film is going to be kind of a tour of the pieces that I put in. Because on Monday I was manning the space, and you know, these open studios are not like a great stream of people, it's not the National Gallery. So I was able to take time between visitors and film the pieces I have on display and just talk about them, how they're made, why they were made, why I chose those particular ones. So, but here you see me en route to a friend's house. My friend Christine is painting some poppies. She was meant to be coming here yesterday, but she wasn't well. So if she can't come to the poppies, I thought I could take the poppies to her. So I've picked them this morning before it gets hot, and I've seared the bottom of the stems. You can see this mark here. That was where I just dipped it into a cup of boiling water for the count of 10 and then straight back into its jar here. And what that does is it means that you can use poppies as cut flowers, and that they will come out from bud. You know, this one here, in the next couple of days, will be out as a full flower. And these particular poppies, these beautiful kind of plum ones, which may or may not be Patty's plum, I got them unnamed from a nursery that was closing down. I think of these as Jenny's poppies because I did them for a wedding bouquet many years ago for Jenny when she got married to Jeremy, and they have since then become really good friends. And every time that these poppies bloom in my garden, I think about that wedding day, and I think that's just one of the wonderful things about seasonal flowers, that you will remember something every year as it comes back into season. So I am going to take these to my friend's house, and you can watch all the bits about the exhibition. So this blanket is really where my whole project started. When we went into lockdown, I have autoimmune disease. I'm immune suppressed, so I was shielding right the way through lockdown. And very early on, I realised that I needed a project. I needed a project where having to be in my garden was going to be an advantage. Now, I have a very big garden. I used to farm flowers, and I still have that size of garden. I mean, it was a micro flower farm, but it's still a big garden. And because it's way too big for me to garden in any manageable area, a lot of it has gone back to wilderness. I'm rewilding my garden through neglect. So what I decided was to see how many colours I could create from plants that were growing in the garden. And this is the result. I was dyeing skeins of wool with different plants, and then I began to knit them up into this very simple stripy blanket that will eventually be on my bed. And I think you can see that the vibrancy of these colours, many of which were dyed in sort of March, April 2020, it rather belies that prejudice that if you dye wool with plants that are not recognised dye plants, it's going to fade immediately. And that is not the case at all. As long as you mordant properly, as long as you dye in a particular way, and you take care, and it is a skill, you can get colours that are amazing. They're earthy colours, but they're not peely-wally, nondescript colours. They are absolutely fantastic. So this is Sweet Sicily up here. Here, this is bracken and fig. I've got more fig down here. Fig leaves, beautiful dye plant. And then we have birch and we have willow. So many wonderful colours from very common plants. So while I was dyeing the wool, I was also dyeing pieces of antique linen that I had in my stash. I wanted to see how the colours work, and as you can see, it is much more muted on the linen than it was in the wool. But the colours are still vibrant, true colours, and again you can see they are holding up fine. This is a Sweet Sicily dye down here, which I think is just a fantastic dye, but nobody uses it, and yet it's such an easy plant to grow in the north of the UK. And it makes the dye studio just smell amazing. It's got this aniseedy kind of scent. So this is called Thinking of Bamboo Delight. In 2017 to 18, my younger daughter Katie was teaching in Mandalay in Myanmar, and we went out to visit her. And as part of that trip, we went to Nang Shui, which is a town on the banks of Inle Lake. And there we took a cookery course to learn about Myanmar cookery with a woman called Sue, who is funding a summer school by having a cookery course business. She's just an inspirational woman, and we kept in touch after we left. And then in February 2021, there was a military coup in Myanmar. The internet went down. It was impossible to get information. Banks shut. There was no way of getting cash into the country to support people. There was no way of knowing how they were doing. And I started this piece. Now, when I was in Nang Shui, I bought this beautiful, you can see it, runner. It's a piece of hand-woven fabric that is all, this is plant dyes and earth dyes. And I had always intended to be going back, or making plans to go back so that I could find out more about the people who were weaving these glorious cloths. So in 2021, I decided that I would use a piece of cloth and make something from these pieces of linen that I was dyeing. And the tiny, tiny quilted stitches that are down here are an indication of all of that. The thoughts and anxieties and worries, but also just that feeling of when you're working on something, you can almost put your love and your kind thoughts and things into the creation of the piece, and that those thoughts somehow add positivity into things. Now, Myanmar is still under a very brutal military dictatorship, and it is an appalling situation for its people, but can now have contact again. Sue has been raising money for her school. She got the school going again Myanmar summer, so that's for the past 6 months, and it's possible to get money through Give Asia into the country. So that's in some ways positive. I'll put the link under here and you can go and check out all the work. What she's trying to do is partly to get children, particularly teenagers, off the street, because being on the street is very dangerous for them, but also to teach them music and environmental matters and confidence and how to defend their own rights and advocate for themselves and for others and for the environment. It's a wonderful project, and I think you should really go and check it out. So back earlier this year, when the idea for having this From the Land exhibition was first suggested, it was at a time when I was trying to work out whether a heat press, which I own from when I had a personalised gift business, whether that could be used to do botanical contact prints. I wasn't quite sure how it could be done, but I had this idea that it should be possible. And I applied to Creative Scotland for one of their makers grants. They're called VACMA grants. And I was awarded a makers grant to develop this process, to give me some time, materials, just to concentrate on getting it to work. And this comes from those very early experiments, because I knew that Sweet Cicely, this is a Sweet Cicely leaf, and I knew that it prints really well. I knew that it's a great dye plant. It's a plant that I feel very connected to in my garden, basically because it is a bit of a thug. It has seeded itself everywhere, but it's very pretty, smells wonderful. So I had this kind of stack of swatches where I had been experimenting. And what I was finding was that my magpie brain, this kind of drive to keep going, keep experimenting and all of this kind of thing, was really becoming problematic because I wasn't slowing down enough to take in the lessons. I wasn't really connecting with it. There was just this kind of frenzied productivity, kind of get through it thing, which does not work, I believe, when you are trying to create with plants. So instead, I thought what I'll do is I will, from each batch of experiments, take something and work it up into kind of like a quilt or an embroidered piece or whatever. You hear all the swelling. So what I did was I took these there are 8 squares here which are mordanted with quite a lot of iron in the alum. That gives it this peachy colour, like a rusty kind of peachy colour. And then this one down here is white. The piece is called sugar because up until the point that there were cheap sugar imports into Scotland, which was like late 17th century, early 18th century, where sugar plantations, which had enslaved people working in them, until sugar came across and was consumed by all levels of society and made it into what we think of now as being traditional Scottish food, like shortbread. Up until that point, shortbread did not have sugar in it. It was a savoury thing. So shortbread and cakes and all of these kind of things, they come from this period where suddenly sugar was accessible. But before that, one of the sweeteners that was used was the roots of the Sweet Cicely plant. And after that, I think it was forgotten about because it's not as convenient, it's not as easy as using sugar. So now, Sweet Cicely roots are being investigated as to whether they could provide a sweetener which would be suitable for diabetic people to use. And we have lots of recipes for the leaves with things like rhubarb. So you don't need as much sugar in rhubarb jam if you've put Sweet Cicely leaves in when you're stewing the rhubarb, that kind of thing. But actually, for the sweetness, it's really the root and not the leaves. And these two pieces are slightly later experiments. I talked about this one, which is the dogwood, in my last video, and about how it's really a celebration of experiments that go a little bit wrong and that you maybe have to try again with a tweak, because you can see that the leaves, they're not as defined as I guess in any of the other ones, and it's all slightly fuzzy and haloey, and now I'm going to try and repeat those leaves with some modifications to my modern tinting process, maybe some size and so on, to see whether I can get different results. And then this piece is rosebay willow herb. When I'm walking down to my studio, there are two great strands of rosebay willow herb. And by this time of year it's taller than me, and I'm waiting for those amazing purple flowers. But each year I try and stop it kind of like going up into the main dye garden, my former beds, because it will just take over. It goes under the ground and it comes up. And I thought, well, here's a plant that I love, and it is really, really useful for all kinds of wildlife. But I don't quite love it when it moves out of the kind of more relaxed space around my studio up into where I'm trying to grow things like madder, indigo and so on. So I thought, I'll see whether it will work as a dye plant, which it does. It gives the most glorious, vibrant mustardy colour, and also see whether it can print. And here you can see the results of it printing. So it's got quite a lot of iron mordant in it. This fabric is peach, like the sugar, and you can see that brings out these very dark leaves. But you can see all the details, and particularly this, which is the bud that is about to erupt into those flowers. It prints as though it is a watercolour drawing. It is just fabulous. And this, I think, has massive applications in fashion and homewares and things, that if we can use heat presses and steam to get this quality of image that can then decorate things. In a couple of weeks I'm running a workshop here as part of like a kind of a whole weekend of activities, and we're going to be printing napkins, and the rosebay willow herb is one of the plants they'll be trying to print onto napkins. So you can imagine that on a piece of fabric that you're using every day, just glorious.